Welcome to Changemaker Q&A, a show brought to you by the School of Social Impact. This is where we dive into the real questions changemakers like you are asking, from tackling inequality to rethinking sustainability and everything in between. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, join our Q&A community group inside the School of Social Impact. There, you can post your own questions, connect with others creating change, and even see your questions featured in a future episode. Head to the School of Social Impact to join us, and let's start answering the questions that move us all forward. To Changemaker Q&A, everybody. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about something that I have been asked a whole heap about lately. And that is how I avoided getting burnt out in this extremely busy period that I have just come out of. Now, I want to kind of preface this episode by saying that what I'm going to be talking about in this episode in particular is not a framework or tips and tricks for avoiding burnout in your life, like in general. This is specifically in the context of when you are going into a busy season or a busy period. Now, for context, I just came out of 6 weeks of full-time work at my new job. So I just got a new job, which I'm now working part-time so that I can focus on disseminating my research and building the School of Social Impact and the rest of the Humanitarian Changemakers Network. But when I started this new job, I had to do the first 6 weeks of full-time training. And it happened rather suddenly. And I didn't have a lot of time to prepare myself between like actually getting the job offer and beginning the job. There was about a 2-week period where I knew that I had to get prepared and have a bit of a strategy to go into this 6-week period so that I didn't burn out at the end. I maybe could have gone in to the 6 weeks and just kept my existing workload up, although I don't think I would have been able to manage it or maintain it. But what I really wanted to do was get intentional about maximizing my productivity and the amount of work that I could do during this period without completely burning myself out. I wanted to finish the 6 weeks not feeling like I was exhausted or needing to sleep for a week or feeling sick and run down. I wanted to get to the end of the 6-week period, drop to my now part-time hours, and feel like I was ready to hit the ground running at full speed ahead. And I can honestly say that now that I'm out of those 6 weeks of full-time work, I feel great. Now, for those of you who are listening, maybe you are somebody who has a family to think about, you have children, so you're already finding yourself in a situation where you're already feeling like a little bit overwhelmed. I just want to emphasize that what I'm talking about here is particularly in the context of going through an extremely busy period. So for the 6 weeks that I was working full-time, I was obviously working a full-time job, which meant I had to leave the house at 7 a.m. and I would get home at about 6 p.m. I needed to obviously have enough energy to show up at work, learn everything I needed to learn to do the job. I was also running HCN, and the 6 weeks that I started doing full-time just so happened to be pretty much the start of our first ever launch for our first paid program with the School of Social Impact. So I had picked this date at the start of the year as when I was going to launch our Systems Thinking for Social Change course. And it just so happened to coincide with those 6 weeks of work. So I was already having a extremely large workload I wanted to keep up and maintain our guest podcast interviews and all of that kind of stuff. And I obviously do a lot of other work beyond HCN and my full-time job. In particular, I'm in the lead up to a conference that I have been on the organizing committee for the New Economy Network, which is an organization that I am a part of. So those were like my 3 big priorities and things that I was trying to focus on. The other thing that kind of threw a spanner in the works a little bit was that I am also doing an internship, an unpaid internship. It's 1 day a week, and that was on Saturdays. So I'm working Monday to Friday. I'm out the door at 7 a.m. I get home around 6 p.m. And then I have an internship on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That is from the comfort of my own home, at least. So that basically just gave me Sundays to work on other things and do all of like my housework and grocery shopping and things like that. And I did not have a lot of time or energy. So what I want to talk about is some kind of the 5 biggest tips that I have for getting you through an extremely busy period or season of life. This is definitely not something that you want to be sustaining over the long term. This is just for those busy periods where sometimes we do unfortunately go through those periods where we just have to hustle. I don't think life should be like that all the time, but I do recognize that whether you're in business, whether you are running your own organizations, whether you work a corporate job, whether you are studying, whether you are a parent, whatever it might be, there are always going to be periods that are just more busy than the others. And these are my biggest tips to avoid burnout during these periods, and at least what worked for me. Now, I should also touch on what I mean when I talk about burnout, because I think there are 2 ways that we can approach burnout. I think burnout can be described as like this feeling that we get when we're exhausted, when we feel really run down, when we feel tired. And then there is also a state of being burnt out. In the same way that you can feel depressed, you can have depression as an emotion, it can be something that you feel, and then you can also be in a clinically depressed state. I would say that burnout is the same. I have experienced both of those. I've been through periods where I felt really burnt out. I felt really worn out. I was exhausted. I was tired. And then I've also just been physically burnt out to the point where I was sick. I had to go to hospital, all of these different things. So I recognize that we're talking about burnout and we're using the term kind of interchangeably. But what I'm referring to is either of those. And I think you get that feeling of burnout over a longer period of time. That is a sign that you're leading to being physically burnt out. And when you're physically burnt out, you just have no energy, no matter how much sleep you get, no matter how well you're eating or whatever, you're constantly sick. And you just have this general feeling of like apathy towards life. All of the things that once excited you and lit you up, all of your passions and the things that bring you joy no longer do. And you just feel empty or nothing. And it's different from depression. And I can say that as somebody who has also been clinically depressed. It's different from depression. It's just this feeling of what is the point? I don't want to do anything. And you just feel exhausted. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the term burnout. Now, the first of the kind of 5 tips that I have to help you avoid feeling burnt out or avoid getting burnt out when you're going through a period of extreme work or hustle is drill down to the essentials. When I looked at the 6 weeks that I was leading up to when I had that 2-week period after getting the job offer and preparing to go into the full-time, I had to say, okay, what are the most essential things that I need to get done during this time? Now, as an example, I mentioned that I'm on the conference organizing committee for NINA. I'm also on the strategic direction group. And so I said to everyone in the strategic direction group, I won't be able to attend our meetings. I won't have the capacity to do any of our work for the next 6 weeks. If the conference organizing committee needs me, then obviously I'm there. I'm capable of doing that work because that is a priority. Having the conference 2 weeks after I finish my full-time sprint. But I just said I don't have the capacity for this right now. And everyone was totally understandable. The same with the Humanitarian Changemakers Network. I had to look at our workload and say, okay, what are the essential things that I need to do here? Preparing for the launch of our Systems Thinking for Social Change course was the number 1 priority. Preparing for the free workshop that we ran to launch the live course and preparing for the other live workshop that I ran during that period and just making sure that everything was ready for that launch. The launch was the priority, as well as being able to have some time allocated to actually engaging with all of the students that are doing the course. So to prepare for that, I had to say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks creating all of our social content for the launch. I had to prepare everything in advance. And then I knew that once the launch was over, I wouldn't be able to maintain our social media content calendar to the same degree. And I was totally okay with that. I was like, social media is not a priority for us right now. Building our email list, not a priority for us right now. all of these things that we normally focus on, not a priority right now. The priority was the launch. And so that was what I gave my time and attention to. In terms of like my personal life, I was able to communicate to my partner that I don't have the capacity to see him every night of the week. And I would be seeing him on weekends, or he could come and stay at my house during the week if he wanted to. But we wouldn't be seeing each other as much because I just didn't have the capacity. And I had to also look at things in my life like running, which I got into running 6 months ago, like most people who are approaching their 30s do when they have a bit of a quarter life crisis or midlife crisis. I don't even know what you'd class as turning 30, but my friends and I used to go running every week. We still do. We went running this morning. We've gone running twice this week. But I said to them, for the next 6 weeks, I can't run. I thought to myself that I would like to keep running on my own, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. And I thought, you know what? Going to Pilates during this period is going to be my priority. Pilates doesn't exhaust me that much. It's something that I enjoy. I can still listen to a podcast or whatever while I'm at Pilates. It's something that I pay a lot more money for. So I still wanted to be getting the value of my Pilates membership during that period of time. So I thought, okay, I'm going to cut out running. I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm not going to do anything on it. And I'm just going to focus on Pilates for the next 6 weeks. So look at your existing workload, everything that you spend your time doing, and say, okay, during this busy period, what am I going to cut out? What are the non-essential tasks, work, activities that aren't going to serve your goals during that busy period that you have? That would be my number one tip. Number two is to set clear boundaries for yourself and stick to them. And when I say boundaries, I almost mean like building healthy habits or routines, but framing them as boundaries that are like non-negotiable things that you're not going to cross the boundaries of. So as an example, I set a boundary for myself, and these are things that are going to seem very silly, but like I will often do a load of washing and then take the washing off the line, and it sits in the washing basket for 2 or 3 days before I actually put it away. And I set a boundary for myself, and I said, every time I do a load of washing, the clothes have to get put away that night. And I just would not let myself have any kind of leeway for that. I also set myself a boundary that every single night when I get home from work, I have to wash my lunchbox, make my lunch for the next day, and pack my lunch so that it's ready to go in the morning. Because I knew that my mornings were already so tight in terms of the amount of time that I had to get everything done in the morning, that if I didn't get it done at night, it was just going to throw out my entire system that I had for the mornings. And so I just set a boundary that said, you do not go to bed until you have made your lunch for the next day. I set a boundary for myself that said, I am not going to drive to my partner's house, no matter how hard he tries to convince me to stay over the night. And every time he was like, you should just come over for the night, it's just one night, I would say, nope, I don't stay at your house on weeknights while I'm working full time. And that was a boundary that, was a boundary that I set for myself. It wasn't up to him to not ask me. It was up to me to respect the boundary that I had set and not go. I set boundaries for so many things in my life. I woke up pretty much every morning at 4 a.m. on average. What I started doing was I started setting an alarm for 3:45. And when my 3:45 alarm went off, I could not hit snooze on that alarm. I had to turn it off. I had to go into the kitchen, make myself like a little espresso, have my espresso. Then if I wanted to, I was allowed to go back to sleep for half an hour. So I had a 4:15 alarm set, and I was only allowed to sleep through to the 4:15 alarm if I had a little shot of espresso first. Why? Because I knew that by the time I woke up at 4:15, the espresso would start to kick in and I would feel awake and I would be able to just open up my laptop and get some work done straight away. If I hadn't had that espresso and I slept to 4:15, then I would be waking up at 4:15. I would be tired. I would have to go into the kitchen and I would come back and I probably wouldn't be able to start actually working until 4:30, which was leaving things too late. I had a rule for myself, a boundary for myself, that Every morning at 5:15, unless I had a podcast interview booked for that morning, I would go to the 5:15 Pilates class. And that was important because if I didn't go to Pilates in the morning, I would have to go to Pilates after work. And I'm always so tired at the end of the day. I would rather just come home, relax, rest, get an early night. I didn't want to have to think about dragging myself to Pilates after work. And so I had this boundary that was like, if there's no podcast interview scheduled, then I go to the 5:15 Pilates class. So having these boundaries and forcing yourself to stick to them is really important. It's the only way that you are going to have the discipline to get through the next however many weeks that you have in this busy period of your life. Now, one thing I will say about setting boundaries is don't set boundaries that are so hard or unrealistic that you can't sustain them for the entirety of this busy period that you have. If I could not sustain waking up at 3:45 every morning because I was forced to go to bed really late in the night for whatever reason, maybe I've got commitments, meetings, interviews, family time, whatever it might be, then setting the boundary that I have to be up at that time in the morning would have been unsustainable and unrealistic. Set boundaries, but make sure they're boundaries that you can actually keep. My third tip is to make it easy for yourself. Don't make this period harder than it already has to be. There are little things that you can do during this time period to just make it easier for you to stick to these boundaries and get all of your work done. As an example, I made it easy for myself to not have to think about what I was going to have for dinner during the week because I got out my slow cooker and I would slow cook dinner on the Monday or whatever day it was. I would slow cook something throughout the day so that I would come home and there was a nice slow cooked meal. Best curry that I've ever made, I made in my slow cooker. I would just buy like the packets of the seasoning for the slow cooker, add a ton of veggies, add some like chickpeas, beans, whatever, tofu, whatever it was. And these were delicious. I bought a rice cooker so that cooking rice when I got home from work would be easy. And I could come home from work, put the rice on. The rest of my dinner was already prepared. And then while the rice was cooking, I could wash up, make my lunch for the next day. And then I had a delicious meal already waiting for me. It meant that I was eating healthy. It meant that I didn't have to think about spending all this time after work cooking dinner. And then it gave me leftovers to have at work or the next night for dinner. When I was in what I called the final countdown of my PhD, which was basically a 30-day period in the lead up to when my thesis was due. It was all of September last year. And my thesis had to be submitted by the end of research quarter 3. So it had to be submitted by September 30th. And I still had a ton to write. So I called it the final countdown. And it was basically one of these busy periods where I woke up, I went to Pilates, I spent all day working on my thesis. During that period, I ordered a meal delivery service where I got a bunch of meals already pre-made, ready to go, sent to me that they were just in the fridge. Every day, I didn't have to think about what I was having for lunch. I would just go into the fridge, pick one out, and that was it. That was my lunch sorted. Same with dinner. Sometimes I would have them for dinner. Sometimes my partner would order food, whatever it was. But for that period, that was just one less decision that I had to think about. It was one less chunk of time that I had to waste doing something that wasn't a priority during this time period. In the last 6 weeks, I have been going to bed at night in my activewear so that when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to think about spending time picking an outfit, getting ready to go to Pilates. I wake up, I'm already dressed and ready to go for Pilates. It saves me that little bit of time. It's just little things like this that make your day so much easier. I started eating crumpets because crumpets are delicious and I forgot how amazing crumpets are. But I always used to be like, oh, I need to have a snack or something when I wake up before I go for a run or now before I go to Pilates in the morning. I just bought a bunch of crumpets, chucked them in the freezer, took out a packet as I needed it, and then I could always have a crumpet in the morning before I went to Pilates. It just made my life so much easier. And then my stomach wasn't grumbling while I was trying to focus on the reformer. There are so many things that we can do to make things easy for ourselves. I made things easier for myself by having pretty much all of the content for the launch of the systems thinking course pre-prepared before I started my full-time work. I had every single email for our mailing list, and that was like 8 or 9 emails already pre-written, already scheduled to go. I had all of our social media posts, reels or TikTok videos pre-recorded. Everything was ready to go and it was scheduled in advance. So I did not even have to think about it, especially in that like second week where I was running the workshop, the live workshop that we did, and then going straight into the launch. Everything ran so smoothly. I barely had to think about it. And thank God I did that, because I would not have had the capacity to have such a smooth launch if I hadn't already gone to the effort of pre-preparing all of that content and stuff like that. Make things easy for yourself as much as you can before you enter a busy period. My fourth tip or piece of advice is find ways to integrate rest into your day. If you're going to be working harder and like using more of your brain capacity, exerting more of your energy physically, you need to be resting. Otherwise, you will burn out. So you need to be able to have a way to integrate rest into your day. As an example, I had my ideal bedtime every night was 7:30, but 8:30 was the time that I had to be in bed, no devices, lights out. And that was because I knew that I would feel like shit the next day if I didn't get a good night's sleep. When I was at work, I wouldn't let myself scroll through social media or check emails or anything like that during my lunch break, because it was just taking up so much of my brain capacity that I would finish my break, and instead of feeling like I was rested, my mind would be like racing, and then I would be going back into all of this training and work. Every Sunday, I would make sure that after I did my grocery shopping around 5 p.m. when I got home, I would put my groceries away. That was a boundary. Groceries had to get put away as soon as I got back from Aldi, which is where I've been shopping for the last couple of weeks. I was allowed to have an early night if I had work to get done, but I didn't want to do that work on the Sunday. That was the window that I gave myself to have a really early, go to bed at 6 p.m. and get 9.5 hours of sleep so that I would be well rested for the week ahead. I made sure there was opportunities for me to integrate rest. When I was on the bus going to work every morning, I would allow myself to just sit there and close my eyes and rest if I wanted to, because I didn't want to force myself to feel like I needed to keep up to date with things by checking my emails or listening to podcasts or anything like that. I made sure that there were opportunities in my week for rest. It was so important. And I would have burnt out. I wouldn't have got through the past 6 weeks if I didn't allow myself those moments of rest throughout the week. The fifth piece of advice that I have, and probably one of the most overlooked when we think about taking care of ourselves and preventing burnout, is to be intentional about what you're tuning into. The last 2 months have been crazy. If you're listening to this in the future, we have just come out of a period where so much has been happening. We've had massive protests for Gaza. Then we had these anti-immigration protests in Australia, in the UK. Charlie Kirk was murdered in the US. So social media in particular has been a crazily divisive, horrible place to be. And I had to be really intentional about what I was tuning into. And I feel like this could be a whole nother episode in and of itself, but a question that I often get asked by people is, how do I stop myself from feeling overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the world? And the analogy that I use is, in your life, in the work that you do as a change maker, like I always use the analogy of a road trip, particularly when we're talking about change making being like a lifelong journey. I use the analogy of a road trip. If you're on a road trip, and maybe this is hard for people who are not my age to relate to, but back in the day, before we had Spotify and all of these podcasts and everything, like the radio was the thing you listened to. And if you were listening to a radio station and there were a bunch of ads that came on that you didn't want to listen to, you changed the station. You didn't have to sit there and listen to all of the ads, and you would have a bunch of stations already lined up, saved in your car, so that you could just press a button and switch stations like that. Unlike with Spotify, if you don't have Spotify Premium and you got to sit through those ads, like with the radio, you would just change the station and you would come back. Same as if a song came on and you're like, I don't really like this song. I'm sick of hearing this song. I don't want to hear it. You could just change the radio station. We can do that same thing in our lives. If you're scrolling in your Instagram or your TikTok feed and you're seeing all of this stuff that you don't like, change the station, tune out, go on to YouTube and be more intentional about the content that you're consuming. Stop consuming all of that content altogether. Have a break from social media. Only go on there to engage with people that you actually like and your friends. Go and listen to podcasts that uplift you and motivate you. There's so much content out there. You don't have to just stand there feeling like a helpless person being hosed over by this giant fire hose of all of the information that is out there. You can intentionally choose where to go and what you want to listen to. So actually do that. Actually be intentional. Actually listen to stuff that is going to educate you and make you feel more empowered. It's one thing to want to stay informed about things. It's another to just feel like you have to deeply engage with these issues to the degree where it's making you feel miserable. And I'm so glad that I just did not have the capacity during that 6 weeks period to spend a lot of time online, because it probably would have really affected my mental health. The very few times that I did jump online, I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I'm not wasting the limited bandwidth that I already have engaging with this shit. And I just logged off. Instead, I listened to a bunch of podcasts during that time. And my time was already being taken up by so many other things, like forcing myself to put my washing away the day that I did my washing, that I had less time to sit there and mindlessly scroll anyway. So it enabled me to then listen to podcasts that actually uplifted me and empowered me and made me feel good about the world that we live in. And we have a whole other episode on the podcast where I talked about mindful news consumption. It's something that, comes up a lot. Episode 36, Should You Stop Watching the News? Mindful News Consumption in the Digital Era. Go listen to that episode. It's a bit of a deep dive into how we can actually mindfully consume news in a way that doesn't completely overwhelm us and burn us out. That was one of the key things that really got me through the past 6-week period. And now that I am out of my 6 weeks, I feel great. I have 2 days a week off, plus I have the weekend, although Saturdays I still have my internship. But I have these 2 days where I'm waking up early, because I've got myself into this kind of habit where I wake up early naturally now. Even when I wake up at 3:45 these days and I have my coffee, most of the time I don't even go back to sleep. I just go back to bed and I'm like, oh, I'm already awake now. Might as well stay up. Cuddle with Rocco, whatever it might be. But I feel so much better. I have so much energy. I'm getting so much done on the days off that I have. I don't feel like the last 6 weeks just completely burnt me out. So hopefully, if you're listening to this and you're about to go into a busy season of life, this gives you some useful kind of tips and a bit of a framework to apply to your life. If you're currently in a busy season of life or busy period and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in far too deep, just take one of these kind of principles and try to apply them one at a time. And hopefully you can eventually find yourself getting to a pace or a space where you can work in a way that is sustainable for you. As always, if you have any questions that you would like me to answer on the podcast, you can head to our brand new Q&A forum via the School of Social Impact, and you can post your questions there. You can answer other people's questions. I will answer your questions, and if I think it warrants an entire episode, I will do a dedicated episode where I answer your questions.
Thanks for listening to Changemaker Q&A, a production of the Humanitarian Changemakers Network. We'd like to thank our sponsors and partners who make this show possible. Whether you're just starting your changemaking journey or looking to fill your changemaking toolkit and amplify your impact, head to schoolofsocialimpact.org and check out our free Social Impact Foundations training. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show or have a story to share, you'll find the question submission form and guest expression of interest forms in the show notes. Tiana and the team would like to recognise the traditional owners of the land this podcast was produced on and extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. We extend our respect to all First Nations people globally and acknowledge that our community of changemakers are impacted by colonialism and extractive capitalism in different ways.